there's a crop older than the pyramids. A tuber that grows where the soil is dust, where tractors fail, and where hunger usually wins. It explodes in neon pinks and purples, feeds without fertilizer, and tastes like fruit after a frost. It once fed empires, and then it vanished. Why? Because when Spain arrived in South America, they found a root too powerful to control. Too diverse to patent. Too independent to fit into an empire. So they chose the potato, and buried this one. But what if I told you that buried crop is still alive, quietly thriving, waiting to be rediscovered? And what if that plant holds the key to surviving the next agricultural collapse? The story doesn't start in a lab or a greenhouse. It begins in the dry, silent sands of the Peruvian desert. Archaeologists brushing away layers of time uncovered something strange, small, bumpy tubers sealed in clay urns. Preserved perfectly for over 4,000 years. But that was just the beginning. High in the Andes, 13,000 feet above sea level, they found something even more shocking, remnants of cultivation dating back 10,000 years. That's older than the first brick laid in Rome, older than written language, older than the pyramids of Egypt. And here's the twist. These tubers weren't found with potatoes. They were found where potatoes couldn't even survive. Too cold. Too high. Too poor in nutrients. Yet this mysterious crop had not only survived, it had thrived. This wasn't some backup food or famine ration. This was the main dish, the foundation of entire high-altitude civilizations, farming on the very edge of what was humanly possible. But what exactly was it? It's called ochre, or yucca to the Andean farmers who mastered it. This wasn't a wild tuber stumbled upon by chance. It was engineered, refined over thousands of years into something far more sophisticated than survival food. The farmers didn't just grow ochre. They sculpted it. They created two distinct types, each with a purpose. The bitter varieties, soaked for weeks and then freeze-dried in the brutal mountain nights, became khaya, a preserved food that could last for years. A shield against famine. The sweet varieties, left to bask in the sun after harvest, transformed as the sunlight converted starches to sugars, creating a vegetable so sweet, it could be eaten raw like fruit. And the names they gave them weren't scientific labels. They were poetry. Varieties were known as black ash, red cosmos flower, rain blood, and cloud tongue. This was not subsistence farming. This was botanical art, crafted across generations. And while European fields were still dominated by a handful of grains, these farmers were already practicing rotational planting, optimizing for flavor, nutrition, and storage, without ever writing a single manual. But as we'll see, that genius became a threat the moment Spain arrived. Ochre didn't just survive in impossible conditions, it outperformed the potato in almost every way that matters. Let's break it down. 42% more vitamin C than potatoes. 45% more iron. Nearly 4x the fiber. High in protein with a balanced amino acid profile. And somehow, it still has fewer calories and fewer carbs. In other words, it filled bellies and strengthened bodies, without the crash of sugar or the weight of starch. But the real shock came from the way it grew. Traditional farmers planted ochre on steep slopes at 13,000 feet, where modern tractors would roll right off the mountain. It needed no fertilizers. No pesticides. Just patience, and a little weeding. And the yield? With modern virus-free stock, ochre can produce up to 55 tons per hectare. That's more than many commercial potato varieties, and on land where potatoes can't even grow. This wasn't primitive farming. This was precision agriculture, designed by people who understood their land better than any satellite or spreadsheet ever could. And yet, in the eyes of the empire, this was a problem. Because the more self-sufficient the farmer, the less control the colonizer had. The date was November 16, 1532. The Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro had just captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa. Despite being offered a ransom of gold that filled an entire room, Pizarro had him executed. It wasn't just a political assassination, it was a signal. A warning that Inca civilization was about to be dismantled, root by root. The Spanish crown and the Catholic Church demanded the replacement of indigenous crops with civilized European staples. Wheat, barley, broad beans. The foods of the empire. And just like that, ochre, yucca, the crop that had sustained Andean peoples for nearly 10,000 years, was labeled primitive. Unsophisticated. Disposable. Only one tuber was spared, the potato. Why? Because the potato was easier to standardize. It was perfect for mass cultivation, perfect for feeding slaves in silver mines, and perfect for plugging into the European system of monoculture and control. Ochre, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. Too many varieties. Too much local knowledge. Too much independence. To the colonizers, ochre didn't represent food. It represented freedom. And in the machinery of empire, freedom was a threat that had to be uprooted. To understand why Spain chose the potato over ochre, you have to understand empire logic. Empires don't just conquer people. They conquer systems, and nothing is more important to control than food. Potatoes, for all their usefulness, are compliant. They fit neatly into large, uniform fields. They grow in predictable cycles. And most importantly, they standardize well. One seed. One method. One outcome. Perfect for taxation. Perfect for plantations. Perfect for domination. Ochre. Ochre was the opposite. It had hundreds of localized varieties, each adapted to a specific valley, soil type, and climate. It was passed from farmer to farmer, not from empire to subject. It couldn't and oppose, be scaled the way Europe wanted, because scaling it would mean flattening centuries of indigenous knowledge. Worse yet, ochre didn't require European intervention at all. No fertilizer companies. No imported seeds. No permission. Ochre thrived outside the system, and that made it dangerous. So the empire buried it under stigma. They called it poor man and oppose, food. Backwards. Dirty. Unworthy of the New World Order. But they didn't just erase a crop. They tried to erase a philosophy, the idea that food could exist without conquest. Empires rise. Empires fall. But in the shadows, ochre never stopped growing. While the Spanish rewrote the maps and renamed the crops, ochre slipped beneath notice, cultivated in hidden garden plots, high in the Andes, passed from generation to generation like a whispered secret. Because you can burn books. You can ban languages. But how do you kill a crop that grows itself? Ochre propagates from its own tubers. No seed companies. No supply chains. Farmers can save their planting material forever, without ever paying a cent. And once it's in the soil, it doesn't ask for much. No fertilizer. No pesticide. No imported equipment. It thrives in places the modern food system writes off as useless, on poor soils, steep slopes, and fractured terrain. And here's the kicker. You can't patent it. You can't trademark it. You can't create artificial scarcity when every farmer is a seed bank. That's why it was dangerous. That's why it was buried. And that's why it survived. Because ochre doesn't need empire. It needs dirt, sunlight, and time, the three things colonizers can never fully own. While ochre faded into obscurity across its native Andes, it was quietly thriving somewhere unexpected. New Zealand. In the 1860s, whaling ships likely carried the strange tuber across the Pacific. It took root in a new land, under a new name. New Zealand yam, though it's not a yam at all. But here and oppose, the twist. Unlike in South America, the people of New Zealand didn't dismiss it. They embraced it. They cultivated it. They sold it in supermarkets. It doesn't require pesticides, so there's no recurring profit. It propagates from tubers, so no one can force you to buy new seeds every year. And it thrives in places no modern crop dares grow. You can't patent it. You can't own it. You can't plug it into a supply chain that depends on dependency. And that's the problem. Ochre is agricultural sovereignty made tangible. A living system designed for human survival, not corporate profit. So what did they do? They called it primitive. They stigmatized it as peasant food. They erased it from textbooks, seed catalogs, and culinary culture. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded without permission. It's not that ochre isn't modern. It's that it's post-empire, a food that remembers a time when farming meant freedom, not finance. And in a world that's rapidly forgetting how to feed itself without machines. Ochre is a reminder that the soil still holds a memory. And it doesn't speak the language of profit. Empires tried to erase it. Industry tried to ignore it. But ochre didn't die, it just waited. It waited in forgotten fields, tucked into garden plots in mountain villages. It waited in the hands of farmers who refused to give up their seeds. It waited in the soil, quiet but alive. Because ochre doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. It doesn't need to be certified, trademarked, or approved. It just grows. And as the climate shifts, as monocultures falter, and as people search for food that doesn't break the planet, ochre is still here. A plant that remembers how to feed people without taking everything else down with it. A root that doesn't ask to be controlled, just respected. A reminder that survival doesn't always come from invention, sometimes, it comes from rediscovery. Because in the end, what they tried to bury wasn't an oppose, just a crop. It was independence. But the seed is still in the ground. And it's starting to grow again.